Looks like we're at 1 minute.
Kevin, you look as nervous as I do. And you've been doing this a lot longer than I have.
It's been a long day. I worked today. Yeah, I think I worry more about noise coming from the other room in my house. Hannah moved back from Oregon.
I saw that. Congratulations on her PhD. Or her
Yeah, thank you.
doctorate. Yeah, congratulations. It's awesome.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the House District 29 Candidates Forum. And we are coming to you live on Zoom and through YouTube TV. I'm Kevin Freeman. I'll be your host this evening, coming to you from District 28 out here on Broad Turn Road. We are joined this evening by the three candidates for District 29, the House of Representatives race for the Maine Legislature in Scarborough. And joining us this evening are the incumbent, Sean Babon, the challenger, Republican challenger, Lee Rosenblatt, and independent challenger, Sophie Warren. We're going to be going for 1 hour this evening, and we are taking questions from the audience at sccquestions@gmail.com. Our signs are being held up by Scarborough Public Library's Nancy Kroll. Art Dillon is with us from the Scarborough Community Chamber, as well as Dennis Meehan from the Scarborough Community Chamber and Karen Martin from SEDCO. We were approached by the League of Women Voters, specifically Deb McDonough, who urged us and asked us if we would be able to help them put on this event. It's the first time we've done it, and Deb and the staff at the League of Women Voters have been of great help to us in helping to assemble questions and also reaching out to each of you candidates. So let's get going. Here's our candidates. Representative Sean Babon, as I said, is the incumbent. He is a Democrat. He served one term in the state legislature. Sean is a graduate of the University of Southern Maine. He works in the banking industry. He has been a member of the Scarborough Board of Education, and most recently, the Scarborough Town Council, where he served as the finance chair for a number of years, as well as council chair before leaving to become the state representative for District 28. The Republican candidate is another familiar name here in Scarborough, Lee Rosenblatt. Lee has a BA in education from Arizona State University and a master's of arts in counseling from Arizona State. She's also received her certificate of labor studies from Cornell University. Lee has worked for the past 30 years as a labor and labor relations and HR consultant. She has served 2 terms on the Scarborough Board of Education, including 1 year as the chair. She has also been on the Scarborough Policy Committee, very active with the Chamber of Commerce, Buy Local, and the Scarborough Kiwanis. Welcome, Lee Rosenblatt. And our third candidate is independent Sophie Warren. Sophie is a Scarborough native and a graduate of Brandeis University, where she studied international relations. She worked for Senator Angus King in his Washington, D.C. office after graduating, and most recently served with the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign, canvassing all over the United States of America. So welcome, Sophie Warren. And with that, I'll ask Sean Babon for an opening statement. Sean, we can't hear you. We're going to need your microphone.
when you hit the 50-year mark, on your birthday, you become challenged technology-wise. Apologize for that. But thank you, Kevin. To the Community Chamber and the League of Women Voters, thank you very much for hosting this forum. It's an exciting advancement in delivering information to the Scarborough voters that is well overdue. I'm a very lucky Scarborough resident. Not only do I enjoy where I live and the services that I receive, you have blessed me with the responsibility of representing you on the school board, the town council, the Cumberland County Commission's Budget Advisory Board, and other regional PACs and commissions, and now the Maine Legislature. And I take that responsibility personally and professionally. Sorry, I'm having troubles with my technology. As a member of all three levels of local governing, I learned that governing and relationship building is made only through a series of significant relationship steps. Tonight, you'll recognize that we are very different candidates offering very different skill sets during an unprecedented economic and cultural crisis. I believe my nearly 2 decades of stewardship and serving Scarborough has prepared me in understanding what impacts our community the most. Whether it was my first term on the school board and when we took the cultural lead in changing our mascot name, or when it was during my 13 years on the town council where we worked through explosive growth, recessionary contractions, and eventual economic recovery, it took experience to find the compromise needed. Being a legislator is more than simply serving the number of days that the legislative session is in session. During this pandemic, I hoped I've proved that my service isn't partisan, but it is biased towards making sure that every Scarborough citizen, regardless of political party or residency, has a strong advocate and voice in Augusta. I believe tonight you will clearly understand that we may all have a very similar goal that is in the best interest of Scarborough, but it is the trajectory and the pathway to finding the solutions that are needed that makes us very different. I look forward to sharing our outlook, or my outlook, for our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sean Babon. Lee Rosenblatt, your opening comment.
So like Sean, a big thank you to the League of Women Voters and the Scarborough Chamber of Commerce, Kevin, Nancy, Art, and Karen for organizing and putting this program together. It may be the first for candidates running for state office. Although a member of the Scarborough Chamber Board, I did not participate in any of the planning for this program. I've lived in Scarborough for almost 40 years in the same house we purchased in Old Millbrook. We moved in August of 1981, and our son came to live with us at 3 days old in September of 1981. Both our children went through the excellent Scarborough schools, our daughter in the special education program from the day she entered kindergarten. We have participated in sports, booster clubs, Special Olympics, and worked hockey bingo even on Thanksgiving Day. We lived through all the ups and downs of raising children and met the challenges of raising a multiply handicapped child. Participating in civic activities, the town has given me leadership opportunities that have taught me the importance of collaboration and what it means to be a leader. Participating in Kiwanis, the Food Pantry, Project Grace, supporting a Christmas family in the backpack program, among other things, has kept me grounded. I work across the aisle. I held a position on the Maine State Civil Service Board for about 15 years. I was introduced to the Legislative Committee considering my appointment by our Democrat senator at the time. An independent governor appointed me, a Republican governor reappointed me, and a Democratic governor named me the chair. I hope after listening to this program and reading my literature, I will have earned your vote. And by the way, I served on school board with Sean, and I served on the with Sophie's grandfather on the Charter Review Committee some time ago, the first time I did it when I was vice chair. So I know some of your, Sophie, I've never met you, but I know your dad and I know your grandfather. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Lee Rosenblatt. And now our independent candidate, Sophie Warren.
Thank you. And thank you so much for everyone that was part of putting this program together. It's so great to be here. And it's also—
Do you have louder volume?
Yes, I think so. Is this any better? Great. Thank you. Thank you. So it's been great. campaigning these last 5 months. I've knocked on over 2,600 doors, going driveway to driveway, meeting and talking with the voters here in Scarborough. And I want to tell you about our campaign and what we're standing for. So there's 3 big issues I think we face here in Maine today. Number 1 is coronavirus. I think economically, I think also medically, we have a long recovery ahead of us, but I'm optimistic that together we can get through this. Number 2, I think climate change is the existential threat of our time, particularly for my generation. Looking at this gorgeous coastal district, it's beautiful, but we need a fighter in Augusta to protect our natural resources for future generations. And number 3, ensuring access to healthcare for all human beings here in Maine. I think if coronavirus has taught us anything, it's that if our neighbor can't get a COVID-19 test because they lost their job and their health insurance tied to it, the entire neighborhood is at risk. I want to represent you in Augusta the way that I've campaigned, meeting you where you're at, community involvement, listening and learning from you. I think the hard work and commitment, passion that I've shown to serve you in the Maine House is how I'm going to govern. I am committed and invested. I'm so grateful for this opportunity tonight. I look forward to your questions. I appreciate your consideration, and I look forward to serving you this fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie Warren. We've heard our opening statements. Now let's move to the questions, and I'm going to ask one. Sean, I'm going to start with you and then go to Anna Lee, then Sophie, and then our second question will start with Anna Lee, then Sophie, then Sean, and so on and so on. This came in through our questions, which is sccquestions@gmail.com. Sean Babon, property tax increases are the biggest source of division in this town. Scarborough is not getting a share of state funding that would help alleviate the local tax burden. What will you do in Augusta, or continue to do in Augusta, to make sure Scarborough receives additional funding for senior tax relief, school funding, and coronavirus aid so it does not require a raise in property taxes to meet the demands of our residents? Sean?
Thank you. So I think it needs to be clear about the progress that the delegation, and when I said the delegation, the fact is that when you go to Augusta, you learn very quickly that you can never achieve anything by yourself. It really is about developing relationships and teamwork amongst the delegation that represents. And a lot of people don't understand that Scarborough is extremely lucky to have 3 state legislators and 2 senators representing the entire town. And it's that force behind it that allows us to truly be a very strong voice and achieving a lot of our successes. The fact is that, and it's an extremely rough number, but this past year, or past biennium, we have been extremely successful in bringing back almost nearly $1.3 million in additional revenues as a result of an increase in the homestead exemption, the increase in the property tax fairness credit, as well as educational spending that has been foregone from us in the past because of a lack of advocacy. And the reason why Scarborough was able to project a 1.5, 1.3% increase is because of that increase in revenue stream. And it's that continued advocacy that we're going to have. Of course, the coronavirus pandemic and the fiscal crisis that is looming ahead of us might change some of that conversation, but having a stronger voice in Augusta that stands up for Scarborough and not simply abdicates and suggesting that because of our increased valuation of our property, therefore we don't need assistance, is not the right tone. And we've been very strong advocates in suggesting that while that may be the case because of the good work our town council and school board have done over the years, we need very strong leadership in Augusta that says we deserve as much money as any other community in the state of Maine, and we deserve our fair share because we contribute to the economy that is allowing for that revenue increase. So I expect to continue that advocacy. I am one of the kind of co-founders, because there were so many of us that founded what is called the Municipal Caucus within the legislature. That caucus is made up of former school board and town council and select persons from across the state, in which our direct contribution allowed us to advocate for the increase in Maine revenue sharing Maine revenue sharing by state statute says that we are supposed to give back 5% to our local communities.
Time.
And in closing, but we were able to increase that from 2 to 3.5% in 1 year, and we need to continue doing that.
Okay, Sean, thank you very much. Lee Rosenblatt, property tax increases are the biggest source of division in town. Scarborough is not getting its share of state funding that would help alleviate the local tax burden. What will you do in Augusta to make sure Scarborough gets enough so they're not requiring a raise in property taxes to meet the demands of residents?
So Sean has it right that you can't do it by yourself. Advocacy is about relationships and getting others to join you. One of the problems that Southern Maine has is that our valuations are high, and the numbers of representatives from up north feel they don't get their fair share either. So we're all fighting for the same pot of money. And to get that pot of money, we have to make a basic change in the formula that distributes that money that was passed some time ago after the first sharing method got thrown out. So we have to change the formula, first of all, to make that happen. I think raising the homestead exemption is much as we reasonably can is very important for our seniors. And I certainly noticed our valuation went up, which is a good thing, but it also raised our monthly payments to meet the tax increase. And last time, I think everybody did a good job. It was smallest it had been in a long time, but there's been some years when it's been really high. And some of that is caused not by the state, but by local decisions as well. So it's not all on the state, but advocating with people and other legislators, some of whom, or many of whom I already know actually, because I work with them around the state, would be the way I would go about helping Scarborough get more money for its schools.
Thank you, Lee. Sophie Warren, property tax increases are the biggest source of division in this town. Scarborough is not getting a share of state funding that would help alleviate the local tax burden. What will you do in Augusta to make sure Scarborough receives additional funding so it does not require a raise in property taxes to meet the demands of our residents?
I think the place we have to start is to understand and appreciate that our seniors, our veterans, are affected disproportionately by this property tax rate. I think it's unacceptable. I think we need a strong advocate in Augusta that appreciates that these sorts of regressive taxes don't serve our district well. These are individuals who have given a lot to our country and our district, and they deserve more respect than this way we're allocating taxes currently appreciates them. I think one thing that has come up again and again as I've gone door to door, particularly earlier this summer ahead of the primary, is this issue around the EPS funding rate, around the fact that Scarborough is dealing with a school funding formula that I think doesn't serve us well. And I want to start by essentially, in reflection of my two fellow candidates and how they've discussed this issue, I respectfully do disagree. I think where we need to start is appreciation that we are fighting for limited resources. I think we're trying to use a funding formula that is not relying enough on federal government funding and relies too much on local municipalities. Essentially, I think we need a bigger pie, not to be fighting for limited resources in the way that we are. And I think if we're talking about fairness, I've spent some time going to central and northern Maine, seeing certain districts where there is, we're talking middle schools, high schools, you go slowly by, they're essentially a couple trailers put together. I think that we deserve a lot here in Scarborough. I think the system is not fair. I will be an advocate for Scarborough. I'm a product of the school system. It's an incredible one. I'm so proud to be from this town, to have benefited incredible teachers, incredible school system. At the same time, I don't think it's either or. And I think the question of fairness is we both deserve more. I think we need a strong advocate in Augusta that appreciates that this entire system is based fundamentally on a structure that I don't think itself is fair. I think we can do better. We need an advocate in Augusta who demands more from our federal government.
Thank you, Sophie Warren. Let's go to our next question. A state and this is Anna Lee, this is coming to you first. A state forecasting committee projects a revenue shortfall of $1.4 billion over the next 3 years. How should the legislature address that shortfall?
So that's a biggie, isn't it? And we're going to have some difficulty, but I think we have to set priorities. We have to look at needs instead of wants. We have to look at our elder population, our disabled population, those that can't do for themselves and they need our help. One way, something I've been told about the state budget is that the government funds a lot of positions that are not filled. And rather than the commissioners or department heads allocating that money through the budgeting process for something else, they leave it on the books. And then it gives them freedom to spend millions of dollars that has not been allocated or approved by the legislature. So that would be one of the first places I would look to see what the extent of that issue is. I've heard it from more than one person. And of course, being in the human resources field, that's the people that I know most with work for the state. And it was very frustrating to them as well. So that would be the first place that I would look. I think people, we're going to have other shortages caused by the fact that casinos were closed. I have clients whose income in Oxford County is based on the casinos. The money was cut almost in half from zero, then in half, and it's still not at full capacity. So it's looking at sources of income. They've talked about, I read that the marijuana brought in $9,000 in new taxes the first day. I'm hoping that we don't have to depend on the sin taxes to boost our tax revenue, because that's causes for other things that need to be funded and taken care of.
Thank you, Anna Lee Rosenblatt. Sophie Warren, a state forecasting committee projects a revenue shortfall of $1.4 billion over the next 3 years. How should the legislature address that shortfall?
Well, I think for one, I really fundamentally just want to appreciate and recognize that that immense revenue shortfall is measured in the pain and harm that's been experienced by our small businesses here in these last months. And I understand and can appreciate that the place that we've got to start in this recovery to raise revenue is we have to look at our state budget. We have to say, are there any programs here that are not essential? I think we owe it to our taxpayers, particularly our property taxpayers here in Scarborough, to start there. If there are places just for a temporary period, non-essential programs, I think that's step one. Step two, I think looking towards our federal government. This is a national problem. It needs a national solution. We're dealing with federal waste issues in the 1970s and 80s, dealing with D-Day. We wouldn't question, is this a national emergency or should we be shoveling this down on the shoulders of state? I think it's ridiculous what we're dealing with. And I think the risk of putting the burden disproportionately on our veterans, on our seniors, on our working families here in Maine is unacceptable. At the same time, I have been fortunate in the recent past to work a bit in Washington, D.C. And I was fortunate to work for Senator Angus King, who was a wonderfully deliberative, independent senator. And so I would just say, even in an instance like that, in an office like that, I can appreciate the dysfunction, the disinterest in working together for solutions. And I am as disgusted as many I've been speaking with in past months to see the partisan gridlock that continues to persist in light of this emergency. So if we're not able to cut the program sufficiently and we're not able to get the resources we deserve from a federal government, I do think we have to look at either cutting more important programs or looking at raising taxes for a temporary period.
Thank you, Sophie Warren. Sean Babine, a state forecasting committee projects a revenue shortfall of $1.4 billion over the next 3 years. How should the legislature address that shortfall? We need your microphone again, Sean.
Sorry. I would like to reference the group here, as well as any viewers and even the question answer. There is a paper out called Solving Maine's Pandemic Revenue Crisis that was published on September 23rd by Sarah Austin, a fiscal policy analyst with the Maine Center for Economic Policy. I actually have that here with us. They're actually projecting only an $883 million shortfall in the next biennium. So I'm not sure if maybe the 1.4 million is over 3 years that extends beyond that period, but the outlook, at least during the legislative period in which we're all serving, is only 883, which is still significant. The fact is that, you know, balancing every budget that I've ever worked on, whether it's a school board, town council, county government, you look at a balance between three primary sources. How do you sustain programs without cutting them so that it hurts the people in which we serve? Where can you provide a realignment of resources? And I know that Governor King actually looked at what I would call in a business world a center of excellence, in which they looked at in trying to identify how can we streamline services to make them more efficient. And of course, it was received with some illness, in the sense that it was viewed while you're trying to cut jobs. And the fact is that if it's done properly, you should be able to retain 100% of your employees, because you are simply realigning the service to improve other areas and expand the services that are truly needed, and looking at the cost of those. So, you know, and I think that the governor right now, in her request for a curtailment of 10%, is truly looking at how they can better streamline those services while continuing to expand what has been once taken away and cut by a previous administration, and then brought back and restored. And then the third is, I don't disagree with reinvesting time and talking about tax policy. There is an unalignment on today's current tax policy with the way that we currently operate. What is the right solution, and what is the balance and the formula, the algebraic formula between all three of those sources? I don't have the perfect answer for that, but I think it requires a lot of people with a lot of expertise to sit down and truly look at what those solutions are, because there are some things that I think are acceptable, and there's some things that aren't to the Maine citizens. They've told us in the past what they should be, and we truly need to look at that. I did want to mention one quick statement, that is that August revenues for the state of Maine is actually ahead of projections. So
Okay.
that we are now finally at least seeing some economic recovery, and we're doing better than before.
Okay, thank you, Sean Babine. Let's go to our next question, and Sophie Warren will lead the pack on this one. Sophie, in the news today was an U.S. Attorney Generals have reached a settlement on the Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals lawsuit, which could bring $1.6 billion to aid in opioids. What would you do to address the opioid crisis currently going on in the state of Maine?
Well, I think that this is, in some ways, not a one-size-fits-all solution. This is something that we have been dealing with for a number of years, and I think there are essentially some really, complexities over the next couple years that I think are going to demand a compassionate solution. So for me, I am not looking at criminalization. I think that more and more, the way to deal with this is to ask for our public health and our public safety departments here in this state to be working together to make sure that we are reducing the stigma and increasing the possibility of overdoses and risk thereof, as well as things like spreading of infection, to be lowered. I think that this is a issue that unfortunately is gotten worse throughout this pandemic. And I want to make sure that we are, as a state, beginning to turn around what has been an absolute and devastating crisis. When I'm going door to door and talking with residents here in our district, the way that this crisis, this opioid crisis, has affected people indiscriminately, of all types of diversity, from race and class and gender, I have just heard the most tragic stories. And at the same time, I've seen and heard hope, places where personal experience has led people to develop a greater compassion and a way of moving beyond partisanship and into a place where we're considering problem solving, and we're considering how can we better our state versus how maybe can we go to our different corners and say, on one side, we're maybe looking to criminalize, and on the other side, looking to not consider how this is related to public safety.
Time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie Warren. Sean Babon, a very literally sobering topic. What would you do to address the opioid crisis in the state of Maine?
So I think that there's two pieces. One is, what is the policy, the legislative policy that you could apply to the pharmaceutical companies, and then what can you do to support the communities that are faced with this challenge? The first is that, well, I don't have a perfect solution, but I do think that that pharmaceutical companies need to be held accountable for their practices and what I will call a lapse in conscious decisioning around how they have promoted opioid use over time, and whether that is taxing pharmaceutical companies. I don't know if that's the right solution, but it's a start. I think that we have a perfect example of what to do right here in Scarborough with Operation Hope. My very first year as a legislator, I sat down at the well, seat number 8. And I got to look up to the audience during the governor's speech. And there was Chief Moulton, who was going to be recognized as part of her speech because of the success of Operation Hope. Unfortunately, she must have forgotten because it wasn't mentioned, but it is a true success. Every community should have an Operation Hope. I know that Waterville has simulated what we have done successfully here. I think that while they have been successful in funding it on their own, I think more communities like Scarborough could contribute to their success through the tax base and through their expenses. And I think other communities should emulate that and continue the great work that they've done. They've been absolutely incredible with their volunteers and the successes that they've had.
Thank you, Sean Babon. Lee Rosenblatt, what would you do to address the opioid crisis in the state of Maine?
I think there's two ways you have to go, two paths. One of them, you have to get these people that are hooked on these opiates into treatment. There's ways to medically treat them, help them find a job, give them meaning to their life, reunite them with their families if that's part of it. But they have to have a purpose, and that comes through helping them to kick the habit, so to speak. And doctors should be providing this, not law enforcement. I certainly support the idea that that if you turn yourself in, like with Project Hope, your actions won't be criminalized. But when I taught school, kids used to think that if they confessed, they shouldn't get disciplined. And, that's not a very positive reinforcement, because then people believe they can do wrong and confess, and then no consequence. So there does have to be consequences. I believe Maine also now is monitoring prescriptions that are written for opiates from doctors. I know my own daughter, who is prescribed opiates, It is monitored incredibly close by her multiple doctors. There's coordination with the doctors so that they cannot go to several doctors to get opiates. And they're prescribing less and less, which I think is a positive sign and good for the state, good for the people as well.
Thank you, Lee Rosenblatt. I'm Kevin Freeman, by the way, and we are holding a candidate forum for House District 29 this evening. Sean Babon is the incumbent seeking another term. He's a Democrat. He's running against Lee Rosenblatt, who is a Republican, and also Sophie Warren, who is running as an independent. Tonight's program is a collaboration between the Scarborough Community Chamber of Commerce and the League of Women Voters. And we've come together with the help of Nancy Kroll on the question page from the Scarborough Public Library, Art Dillon bringing me questions from the Scarborough Community Chamber of Commerce, Karen Martin running the board from SEDCO. And I've got a question that Art has sent me that came in from the audience, and I'm going to direct it to Sean Babon. Sean, what do you think is the biggest issue facing your constituents in the next session, and how will you address it? And microphone again.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
The challenges is there are so many issues, talking to the many, doing phone banks, and everyone is impacted differently by everything that we're dealing with related to coronavirus, whether it's continued unemployment, access to health care that they lost as a result of being furloughed, food insecurity, the threat of losing housing. There is so much that you're trying to balance and providing for your constituency. And then on top of that, then there's the challenge that the national election is also proposing, in the sense that depending upon who is elected president, we could have two very different cultural divides that occur after November 3rd and after November 4th and or 3rd and after January 21st, that will impact our legislative priorities, that are everything from defending what we've built up over 2 decades and 3 decades worth of activity and legislative work, as well as protecting and advancing other areas. So I think that access to healthcare continues to be the #1 priority, and that's affordable healthcare, because more and more restrictions are being placed. This past session, I was lucky to be part of a delegation that supported expansion of Medicaid services, Medicaid services, and providing hearing aids at an increased level, or at least covering the greater cost of that up to $3,000. But there's so many other services as well. But at the same time, a change in the Supreme Court can also change access for women's health care, and the privacy that they make their own decisions. And so that is going to be something that we will have to defend and continue to advocate for. So we are in a changing cultural division. And so while I can sit here today and say I have one priority that I think is the most important, November 3rd will change the trajectory of what those priorities are going to be. And so I really need to kind of wait and answer that question after the election.
Thank you, Sean Babon. Lee Rosenblatt, what do you think is the biggest issue facing your constituents in the next session, and how will you address it? Oh, your microphone, Lee.
So the issues are different for different age groups and where you are in your life. For seniors, it's the increasing cost of living, the taxes, the property tax, the state mandating coverage, mandating programs for which they do not provide funding that goes into the local property tax. They're really worried about that. I think they're also worried about COVID. People want to know how much longer is this going to last? Is it going to be affecting them? It was just a crying shame what happened to the our older population who were in nursing homes and the veterans' homes that couldn't be with their families when they got sick. So that's a real big concern. I think that is something the state can't do a lot about in terms of finding a cure or finding prevention medication, but it's certainly something that they can do the state can do in each business. I know that there are businesses in Scarborough that are out of business after being here quite a long time. That meant job losses. It meant businesses that contributed to our schools by sponsoring sports and community service clubs, by helping these groups raise money. All of those are gone, and they donated goods, they donated funds, they donated prizes and services so that these groups can raise money. So they're worried about the downfall of all of this, or the fallout of this COVID. These people that are older, they're isolated, they're by themselves, they're afraid. So we've got to find a way.
Thank you, Lee
We're
Rosenblatt.
going to follow the sign.
Sophie Warren, what do you think the biggest issue facing your constituents in the next session will be, and how will you address it?
I think number one is coronavirus. I think it's going to consume much of our time as the legislature in the immediate future during this 2-year term. I have admired the leadership of Governor Mills, who I think has let us make some tough, courageous decisions, helped to lead to fewer deaths and certainly less spread of the coronavirus than almost any other state. I think economically, we need a robust economic recovery for our small businesses, and supporting them is essential and a priority of mine in the new term. I think beyond that, and during that recovery, climate change. I think it is the existential threat of our time. I think it's my generation who will solve this issue and see it as the priority fundamentally that it is. Even during this recovery, we cannot put off the climate crisis. It is before us already. I just in the last month have been speaking to a couple voters down by Pine Point, and they show me an aerial photo, 40 years, the way that sea level rise, the eroding sand dunes have led to them this pretty morbid joke they tell, that soon the second row of houses is going to become beachfront property. I think that there is a urgency right here in our district. We have a gorgeous coastal district, but we need to fight, and we need a fighter in Augusta to protect it. I think during this recovery, we have to consider climate change. I think you can't prioritize one over the other at this point. We can't wait and hold off a few more years. This is a gorgeous coastal district. We need an advocate in Augusta today to protect it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie Warren. And now, Lee, you'll lead this next question. And I'm going to stay right on that topic. We've had 3 questions emailed into us about climate change. Lee, many experts believe that climate change will affect Maine tourism, fisheries, forestry, and agriculture. Rising seas may threaten coastal communities and properties here in Scarborough. What should Maine be doing to combat climate change?
I had a chance to read something the other day about Maine that shocked me. So I'm really curious. I just read it about how and why Maine is the dumping grounds for tons, 235,000 tons of waste brought in from out of state, where waste disposal has been banned in their own state and apparently not in Maine, and they're bringing it up here. So they didn't say it was being dumped in Scarborough, but it sure is something we need to keep an eye on and make sure that that never happens. We need to look at the dumping that's going on up in northern Maine to stop this, because this is part of what's going on. The emissions into the air from dumps, rotting things that they put into those dumps, and whether they're trying to cap them. I know Portland tried to cap them because they were emitting so many things into the air that were not safe and were not healthy. So we have to explore many areas. Wind power, they're trying to get wind, a big project going. I know people don't want a windmill in their neighborhood, and they don't want the windmill out in the ocean where they can see it. So there's a problem that we have to mesh the not in my backyard attitude about what's going to be done about the clean air, clean water, and the erosion of our coast, because we rely on our coast. It's one of our biggest industries with our fishing industry, and we have to protect those folks as well.
Thank you, Lee Rosenblatt. Sophie Warren, many experts believe that climate change will affect Maine tourism, fisheries, forestry, and agriculture, and rising seas may threaten coastal communities and coastal properties. You spoke about the need for addressing climate change, but what should Maine be doing to combat climate change?
Well, to protect our coastal districts, particularly Scarborough, where I'd be representing you in the Maine House, I think we need robust mitigation efforts to start. I think we need investments in renewable energy and a mass reduction in CO2 levels. But I think one thing in being an independent and working with both sides of the aisle, I think we need a level of buy-in and a sense of community investment right here in Scarborough to make sure that we all understand and can appreciate the dire threat before us. So I mentioned that story a bit about Pine Point. Well, I've just in the last day got a message from a woman in Prouts Neck who is a strong conservative, and frankly, I'm not sure was someone who even necessarily to this day acknowledges the man-made effects of climate change, but is absolutely concerned about literally her own property. And so I think if we can, as legislators, take on this responsibility, ask that our state legislators, our executive officials at the state and national level come to places like this, see the effects firsthand, and appreciate that we are out of time. I think that the type of conversation, the framing of conversation that we've been having is really optimistic at the state level. We had a bipartisan bill in the last year, hoping for a goal, I believe it's 80% reduction in CO2 levels by 2050. That is extremely encouraging. And I want to be a leader in Augusta to further those efforts of leaders like Governor Mills. And it encourages me that we have youth on the Climate Council that was passed at that time. I am optimistic, but I think a level of urgency and public education on this issue for people of all levels and all ages needs to be number one priority, especially for a representative of a gorgeous coastal district like ours here in Maine. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie Warren. Sean Babon, what should Maine be doing to combat climate change?
The challenge is that we all have very creative and optimistic ideas about what can be done. However, we don't know whether or not that optimism really will solve that solution. So I think that at this particular point, the governor's plan that will get us to 2050 is a good start. The challenge that we're faced with that is that we need to reassess, given the impact of COVID, is whether or not we're still on pace to realize those milestones and expectations that were part of the conversation regarding the initial plan. So I do think that there needs to be a reassessment in whether or not we can achieve that. Myself and Representative Lori Gramlich from Old Orchard Beach actually introduced a request to create a study commission that would look at shoreland zone shoreline zoning, and particularly rising sea levels, that did get approved as part of the last legislature. And that is a start in which we can then look at both communities, because we are contiguous to each other, and what the impact is. And so that is a nice start to that. There has been several introductions of legislation already around growth management. I know that Scarborough needs to revisit that at the local level. It has been a issue for many, many years, not only about growth management throughout the town, that's maybe inland, but the fact is that what is causing kind of the concern isn't necessarily locally or state controlled, but has really been initiated by the federal government and their new flood maps. And so trying to respond to federal government and federal legislation is always a difficult challenge. So I think that what Ms. Warren has addressed is definitely a particular challenge. The question is, where is the solution? The solution might not be locally, but rather with advocacy through Representative Pingree and Representative Golden and our senators' offices, as well as promoting growth management legislation locally, and then supporting our shoreline zoning and our rising sea level studies.
Thank you, Sean Babon. Let's get one more question in and then we'll go to our closing comments. So Sophie Warren, I'm going to ask you the question. In today's current political climate, politics seems to be more divided and partisan than ever. This is not just on the national stage, but it's come down to state and local politics. What do you think of the current state of partisan politics, and what will you do to work across party lines to get good pieces of legislation acted upon?
Well, thank you so much for this question. I think as an independent and in the way that I've chosen to campaign, I hope that I can be that change. And for me, what that looks like is, even in going door to door these past 5 months, because I'm an independent, I can go up, introduce myself, and someone will say, "What party are you a part of?" And I say, "I'm an independent." The type of conversation we can have, to talk to each other as normal people, to find things that we bond over, the problems that we deal with day to day. We live in this same gorgeous district. There are so many more things we have in common than we have that divide us. One issue that I have is, running as a young woman, I think that I want to be the representation of diversity that I think is essential more and more in our state government. I look around, I look at our state legislature and I say, we've come so far. Why are we still only at 37% women in our Maine House? I'm pretty sure we're at least 50% of the state. And I think that with more people who frankly look like me, I think also we'll begin to think differently. I think good, decent people that come from a variety of backgrounds, getting together to represent the normal everyday people that live where they live and love in the same way they do and care and are bothered by many of the same things they are. You know, I think that there's this idea of, backroom deals and people smoking cigars. That sort of old boys club, I think, gets more and more difficult the more people you have in government that look like me and maybe talk a bit more like me. And I think that there are opportunities that come along with, instead of pointing blame, taking responsibility. And if I look around and I say, things are so bad that I need to be that change at 25, I think that I can offer something different and be that collaborative leader that becomes the change, the different type of government that we can have going forward. And that's what I'm offering in this campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie Warren. Sean Babon, tell me, please, how you can cross party lines and work across the aisle in a bipartisan manner.
So, not to digress from the question, because I can definitely answer it. There's actually on swearing-in day, December 5th of 2018, I brought a dear friend who's a former town councilor, and he's taken a video from up in the balcony. And so typically on that first day, we are separated. And the very first thing I did, because I thought it was kind of ridiculous that we're all sitting there looking at each other, not daring to get out of our seats, I got right up and went across the aisle and shook hands and introduced myself to my colleagues on the other side, because that's our responsibility, is to develop relationships. And that's what I will continue to do. I did that on the school board when I worked with Anna Lee on our policy committee. I did that on the town council, even when I was in my last year, probably part of a minority on the finance committee. And I'm going to do that when I'm in the legislature. The fact is that civil discourse doesn't start by identifying it as a problem with other people. It's by acting on it within yourself and how you contribute to that. So Ms. Warren is absolutely correct. It's about not pointing fingers. It's about taking responsibility and how you contribute to that. I've seen how people have worn that on their sleeves in the past. And the fact is that we all contribute to that. And it's about how can we change ourselves to be better people and to be better leaders and to work for the betterment of the people that we serve. And it's that work ethic, and it's remembering that while you are up in Augusta, you are responsible. And by the way, I firmly believe that while we represent one part of Scarborough, which is Route 1 to the water, you're truly representing the entire town, because you will get calls from North Scarborough. You'll get across, over on Maple Avenue, just across the border. And you're expected, and I hope that we're expected to help everyone. It doesn't matter where they're from. And you have to have that work ethic to really understand that we're there to serve other people and not for ourselves. And it's taken that responsibility. And I believe I've done that over the years on the school board, the town council, the county budget, and forming those relationships regardless of our political affiliations, because it really doesn't matter.
Thank you, Sean Babon. Anna Lee Rosenblatt, how will you work across party lines to get good pieces of legislation acted upon?
I've been doing that for years. When you work in, are elected to office, especially in town offices that don't have parties, that isn't an issue. When Sean and I were on the school board together, we never talked about what party are you or what is the political philosophy. We talked about what did we need to do with the policy committee that we were working on. And we met frequently, and it was just not an issue. I'm in Kiwanis. I have some very good close friends at Kiwanis, Jackie Perry being one of them. She and I, for the last few years, have split a family for Project Grace to make sure the children in that family have a good Christmas. So, and we work on all these things together. So I don't think it's the people. I don't think it's the parties. I think it's the press. And the press has hyped this up to the extent that people are in a frenzy. And so it's just natural. I mean, when you ask how I would do it, I've always done it. There's nothing special that I do. I've been, as I said in my opening statement, appointed to state positions by Democrats, Republicans, Independents. I was appointed, I hope, for my qualifications to do the job, not because of the R after my name. So, yeah, it's just a way of life for me. I don't think that you have to work at it. You have to work. You have to do it. Walk the walk, not talk the talk.
Thank you, Anna Lee Rosenblatt. I'm going to get you ready now for your closing statements. Sean, you'll be going first, followed by Anna Lee, and finishing up with Sophie Warren. I'll ask that you stay as close to 2 minutes as you can. And I wanted again to thank the League of Women Voters for approaching the Scarborough Community Chamber about partnering up for tonight's event. For the first time we've ever worked together, and it's the first time that we've covered Maine House District 29 out there, as someone said, east of Route 1. And I wouldn't know that out here on Broad Turn Road in District 28. But, there are a number of issues that we did not even get to tonight. We really didn't touch on the unemployment system, though some did mention that that's been a problem during the pandemic. Our fisheries, childcare, food insecurity for those kids who have just don't have the resources. Ranked choice voting we haven't discussed. Tribal relations, which is something that you'll all be facing should you get elected. Tourism, the gas tax, a number of issues that we did not cover tonight in only the hour that we had. But the those are issues, and I hope you've had a chance to get your thoughts together for closing statements. And I'll go first to the incumbent, the Democratic candidate, Sean Babon. And you'll need your mic, Sean.
I just got to get used to that. Thank you to the Chamber, the League of Women Voters, and to Mr. Freeman. Kevin, you have been a wonderful steward to Scarborough, having done this for many years at the local and state level. So I really appreciate you exploring this opportunity. This has been a wonderful evening of information sharing, and I hope that we continue to do this for all of our House district races going forward. While tonight we explored many possibilities of what can be in store for the next legislature, the fact is we are faced with an unprecedented financial crisis of historic proportion. And while we can have the energy and creativity and the optimism of tomorrow, experience does matter today. If you're looking for a candidate with all the solutions, then I am not that candidate, because in fact, no one achieves anything on their own at Augusta or in Washington for that matter. It requires experience, relationship development, and knowledge of how to govern and what impact it has on your constituents back home that is most critical to your lives. Setting priorities, establishing norms, and supporting sustainable programs is key to our state's success and our community's value. Investments is the key to our economic recovery that includes infrastructure and governmental services. I offer a broad range of experience in managing your priorities that include managing a school budget of almost $43 million, a county budget of $45 million, the approval of many town budgets of almost $100 million each year, and now a state budget of $8 billion. And professionally, I've managed a customer portfolio of almost $4 billion in the private sector. I believe that experience does matter. The legislature does not grind to a halt because it runs out of good ideas. It gets stuck when not enough people are willing to move forward toward a common goal. Since my first day, I've worked across the aisle to build those relationships. We cannot afford to grind to a halt as we have when negotiating a return to the session to do the people's work that got stopped after the pandemic. In 1999, my first election to the school board, and every election since, I've made one promise to you, the voters of Scarborough. I will listen, I will learn, and I will lead. I have been and always will be the strongest voice in representing all of Scarborough and Augusta. I ask for your vote on November 3rd, and thank you for tonight.
Thank you, Sean Babon. And now the Republican candidate for House District 29, Lee Rosenblatt.
So my closing statement, I'm going to take an opportunity to introduce myself because you can, as the person. So I've lived the all-American dream. I'm a first-generation American. My father was born in Lithuania and came by boat with his parents and sister to make a better life in America. They moved west and built a business. After the military, my father spent the remainder of his 20-plus career as a federal mediator. The value of hard work and self-reliance and consistency is a part of my core values. My father was also a World War II veteran, and I have two cousins who are pilots, one in the Air Force, one in the Navy, who flew in Korea and in Vietnam. I know the sacrifices our veterans make to protect us. Respect and support the military, law enforcement, and first responders are another core value. I want to continue to advocate for all people, including disabled, senior citizens, and our veterans. Having a child with multiple disabilities, you learn the art and science and skill of advocacy is a must. I've been an advocate for both unions and management in my consulting career. Seeing both points of view, listening, and trying to find a middle ground is a skill set I've developed. Support responsible spending and growing opportunities for others. Advocate for education so that we can support the Scarborough schools to maintain their place as one of the best educational systems in the state. Not everyone is college bound. We ought to be supporting to the two-year schools that are teaching trades and people to go to work. My formal education, varied life experiences, and political activity makes me ready to serve and advocate for the citizens of District 29, Coastal Scarborough on day one, helping to solve the budget shortfall, healthcare crisis, and preserving the environment, which is so critical in order to keep our beaches clean and our fishermen able to earn a living from the sea. Please vote now at Town Hall by absentee ballot or at the polls on November 3rd. I'm asking for your support and vote.
Thank you, Lee Rosenblatt. And finally, the independent candidate, Sophie Warren, with her closing statement.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who came here and listened to what we had to say. Thank you to my fellow candidates. Thank you to everyone who helped put this night together. It's been a great experience answering your questions. Appreciate you sending them in. I have had a wonderful experience these last 5 months. I've learned so much. It's been a joy to listen, to learn, to go around this wonderful district from Pine Point Beach to Higgins Beach. This is a beautiful, beautiful district, and it's where I grew up. I love it, but I know we face big problems here in the state. And I look forward to serving you in the Maine House, and I understand that there are some big issues that I still have to learn about. And when I have a question, I'm going to come to you. I think I'm going to serve you in the Maine House the way I've run this campaign. I'm not above you, I'm with you. And for me, I've learned so much throughout this campaign, and I realize that the urgency in this moment and the things that we face are number one, whether it's coronavirus, our small businesses and the recovery, keeping our public health secure, whether it's dealing with climate change, making it a more fundamental part of all the work we do in the Maine House, whether it's ensuring access to healthcare for all human beings here in Maine. If your neighbor doesn't have access to a COVID-19 test, like I said at the beginning, I think we're lost. I think this experience, this time of crisis, it's an opportunity for my generation to step up, and I think I'm ready to be a part of a solution, absolutely one that is optimistic, one that is willing and open to collaborate, and I look forward to serving you. I appreciate your consideration. I hope to earn your vote on November 3rd. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sophie Warren. And again, thank you, Representative Sean Babon, candidate Lee Rosenblatt, and Sophie Warren for joining us tonight for the Maine House District 29 Candidates Forum. And again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters, in particular, Deb McDonough, who approached the Scarborough Community Chamber President, Dennis Meehan, about this idea of doing another candidates night. And my friends, Nancy Kroll from the Public Library, up in the upper right on my screen, and right below me, Art Dillon from the Scarborough Chamber of Commerce, and off camera, Karen Martin, who really pulled things together along with the IT department at the town of Scarborough, led by Don Babon, and in particular, Tristan Snyder, who set up all our links and all that. So I could talk to you from my office, and you could all join us from your homes. So good luck. Absentee voting is ongoing in Scarborough, both for early voting and also the absentee balloting. There's a big old mailbox right outside of Town Hall that says, deposit your ballots here. And on November 3rd, you can go to the Scarborough Town Hall to vote in person if you so wish. But make sure you vote. And again, candidates, best of luck to you all, and to all of everyone out in online and on the internet, on YouTube. Good night, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kevin.